Hey guys, welcome back to another impressions video. Here to talk about my favorite game of all time, The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. For different systems, as you guys can see here, I have my setup of kind of like my personal Ocarina of Time collection. And I was supposed to do this impressions video last year because that's when I bit this game. I played this as part of the map out that we did with the button mappers in their podcast. Where we discussed this game in great detail. It's like a 3 hour long episode, so I'm going to be leaving a link in the description below so you can hear my thoughts and the button mappers thoughts as well. We go very in depth discussing this video, but I figured I'd do my own impressions video, kind of like giving my own personal touch and thoughts of one of my favorite games of all time. Because as much as I keep mentioning how much I love this game, I've never really done an impressions video on my channel for Ocarina of Time because it's been a while since I beat the game. Obviously, I did it last year for the map out of the game, but before then, the last time I beat the game was when the 3DS remake got released that I have here. And again, as you guys can see here, I'm a huge fan. This is still my original copy that I bought, or that was gifted to me in holiday of '98 by my family, and I still have the shrink wrap. I don't know if you guys can see here. I used to cut a slit here, as you guys can see, to take the game out. I was very meticulous even back then. So I still have my original copy here with the shrink wrap. And this was I believe the GameCube version was a pre-order bonus from Wind Waker, and I got this on day one as well. Memory's a little bit fuzzy, but I was very excited for Wind Waker, and this was part of a like a bonus pre-order disc at GameStop. And then I got this. The reason why I got a Nintendo 3DS was this game right here. Oddly enough, an old title being remade. But it's my favorite game of all time. So when Ocarina of Time 3D came out for the 3DS, that's when I bought a Nintendo 3DS. And this is definitely the best version of the game in my opinion. And last but not least, we have the collector's edition here, which I bought this as an adult and back in 2012, I want to say. And I'm glad I did. This is I bought it for $50 on eBay, and I believe it's commanding a higher price point at this point. But this is in excellent condition. The only difference, back then they didn't really have a whole lot of collector's editions. The only difference here is this one has a shiny cover, which is kind of like just like another cardboard, pretty much stuck on top of the original case. But the actual cartridge is, it's a gold cartridge as opposed to the regular one, which is a gray, just a regular gray cartridge. But yeah, this is kind of like my little Ocarina of Time collection. And as far as going into my impressions video, I just want to start a little bit different, kind of like giving my thoughts, because I was there, I was a young kid or whatever. I mean, back in '98. Actually, I was more of a young teenager back then, and that was in the days where the internet was still very young. Not everyone had internet back then, and even then the coverage was very limited as far as video games. There was no YouTube, so the point I'm trying to make is the bulk of the information that we received back in the day was from game magazines. So. It was either very limited information. For example, I remember the first time that I saw any footage of Ocarina of Time was the first 3D renderings where Link had that really pointy triangular nose. That was one of the early shots that was available to the public back then. And even though it looks like crap by today's standards. Back then we were all impressed. We were like, oh my God, this game is going to be so awesome. And it's a really big contrast to today's, I guess, hype. Because today, you can go online, you can go to YouTube, you can watch an HD video. Heck, you can even watch 4K footage of upcoming games. So if you're hyped for a game that's coming out later in the year, you can download demos, you can play betas or alpha test the games. You can watch previews from hundreds of YouTube channels, but back then it was just gaming magazines and the odd website that had outdated information. So a lot of people wonder, is this truly a warranty, warranting the masterpiece status? Because as some of you guys may know, Ocarina of Time still commands one of the highest scoring as far as review scores of all time. And obviously I'm going to say yes, but the reason why I'm going to back that claim is because back then, the hype was so high in this game, and the hype was consisted of us, the fans, kind of like creating all these visual images of the game in our heads, because we didn't have any HD YouTube videos, we didn't have any 4K previews or anything like that. We only had a couple of blurry screenshots on magazines, and then it was up to our imagination, just running wild with our imagination, picturing how Hyrule Field will look in 3D, how Link will, take the Master Sword and, combat the enemies. So it was a lot of, I guess, expectations and hype that we created, like this unreal hype. And this is one of the very few games in history that managed to either match or exceed those expectations, and that it's a triumph in itself, because when you have your imagination running wild, you can very easily be disappointed. But this game just shattered expectations. It managed to blow everyone away, and hence why this game got so many perfect review scores, 10 out of 10s, hundreds out of hundreds, whatever, 5 stars, whatever. So in my opinion, it's warranted. Of course, I'm going to be biased because this is my favorite game of all time. But there's a reason why this is my favorite game of all time. It's because if you really had to be there back in the day, in '98, for this game to just completely blow you away. And on top of the exceeding the hype, this game brought to the table a lot of I guess innovations, like the Z targeting system, which today is kind of like known as the lock-on system. Every modern third-person game has that mechanic, and this is the game that first utilized that. As far as I'm concerned, back then, this game had state-of-the-art technology, 3D graphics and whatnot, the freedom in the world, exploring Hyrule Field, which there's really not a whole lot to see there, but back then it was like mind-blowing, being able to ride Epona, the horse, the night and day cycle mechanic, the collectibles in this game, the gameplay, the combat system, a lot of just a complete package that was put in this beautiful game. Tons of content, great side stories, like the Skulltulas, that was one of the best. It still remains, in my opinion, one of the best like side stories, if you will, or side missions in a game. This game just managed to really put a very well put together package. And so, with that being said, let's start with the story of the game. That's another area where I think this game really stepped it up a notch compared to previous Zelda games. Zelda games in general have a very simple storyline, if you will. I think games like Skyward Sword and maybe Breath of the Wild have a more elaborate story, with Skyward Sword having the provenance of the Master Sword. That's basically the story of the game. And then Breath of the Wild just took it up a notch in terms of like a more story-driven type of a game. But Ocarina of Time, I thought back then, even though the storyline is simple, I think it just stepped it up a notch, and it was very enjoyable. It was very interesting back then, kind of like finding out more about the goddesses, how Hyrule came to to exist, the backstory of Ganondorf, where he hails from, the NPCs and the characters, the Gorons, the Zoras, everything had a little bit more of the overall lore was expanded just a tiny bit more, not a whole lot of detail, but enough to make it a very, very interesting and compelling game. And then you add the time mechanic, the whole traveling in time really added a great storyline in the game. As far as graphics, as I mentioned, this game was very revolutionary back then. Being the first 3D Zelda game. The expansion pack was not out yet, but this game managed to put beautiful graphics for being a 1998 game on the Nintendo 64. I think if you look at later titles, like Perfect Dark, obviously, I think the developers will manage to get more horsepower out of the Nintendo 64. But when this game was released, this was the top dog, if you will, in terms of graphics. And my best memories of just being blown away by the graphics was watching the sunrise or the sunset in Hyrule Field or Lake Hylia, for example. Just the beautiful different shades of colors in the sky. Just magical moments that I remember, and the different environments. You have the mountains. You have the Kakariko village with all the NPCs, the Hyrule castle town, if you will. So a lot of variety in terms of the settings and environments, the ice caves, the Zora lair, and things like that really make this game, the graphics stand out. Of course, if we talk about strictly great graphics, the Nintendo 3DS version is the way to go. It includes high resolution, textures, which is pretty cool. So, and it's also the most, I guess, affordable and attainable version of the game. So, if you guys are, new to the Zelda series, definitely aim to play the Ocarina of Time 3D version. In my opinion, this is the definitive version, and it happens to be also the most easily available. 3DS games are starting to become a little bit more hard to obtain, so make sure you grab your copy of Ocarina of Time 3D before it becomes like a rare game. So that's the story with the graphics. A very revolutionary game back then for the Nintendo 64, and then the 3DS version obviously takes the cake with the improved graphics and textures. As far as the sound, fantastic soundtrack. This game just has the most memorable soundtracks out there. Although I'm a big fan of A Link to the Past, that probably has my favorite Zelda soundtrack. But Ocarina of Time is up there. The Kakariko Village theme, which it's basically similar to the SNES, but just more instrumental, if you will. The Gerudo Desert or Fortress song. That's another iconic soundtrack for the Ocarina of Time. But overall, just the soundtrack, fantastic. Can't complain. A lot of classic tunes are in there. And then, of course, finally, in terms of gameplay, I think that's where, as I mentioned before, the Z targeting system, that was a novel thing back then. Being able to use your shield and sword at the same time, kind of like having a more tactics, if you will. The biggest gameplay element obviously was the time travel and the way the game was set up. I thought it was. Although the game is a little bit on the, it doesn't give you as much freedom as the NES game, for example, or Breath of the Wild, where you can just kind of like go in any order. Ocarina of Time, does a beautiful job. You have your first 3 original dungeons when you're a young Link, and then when you become an adult, you have to go through all the temples to get the 7 sages out there. And obviously, when you're adult Link, the whole Hyrule, it's just barren and destroyed. I remember being so upset the first time I played as an adult Link. I stepped out of the Temple of Time. You see everything is destroyed, and I remember I was like so angry at Ganon, and I was like, I'm gonna get you for destroying this beautiful world that I experienced in kind of like the first part of the game. Obviously, when you're young Link, everything is vibrant and colorful, and everything is happy, but then as adult Link, everything is destroyed. So you really have that mission of restoring everything back to normal. You really have that motivation of helping the kingdom of Hyrule go back to its former self. And Yeah, I think as adult Link, I think it was a little bit more fun because you have Link is stronger. The combat system is better because you can have the shield in one hand, the sword in another one. Obviously, you can make use of the Master Sword and other high power weapons. And I think the dungeons also are better when you're adult Link. The Forest Temple being my favorite. Just a very creepy, like scary atmosphere, very creepy soundtrack. That really very eerie a soundtrack that it's a very touching. Just an overall fantastic experience. You have the infamous water temple that play the 3D version if you don't want to get as frustrated. It has some visual hints that will help you, but it is definitely a very complicated dungeon. I can see why people get frustrated, and I can see why it has this like historical reputation to it of being a super hard dungeon. But once you know what to do, obviously it becomes a little bit easy. But it is, there are a lot of old school elements and mechanics that obviously have not aged greatly. And that's kind of like one of my fears, moving forward into the future when younger generations pick this game up, because everyone is going to hear about this game. This at one point, this was the masterpiece, one of the highly most highly reviewed games of all time. So I fear that at one point, the greatness of this game is going to start being lost in translation, which leads me to my kind of like one of the everlasting questions within the Zelda community. Do you want a remake for Ocarina of Time? And being a purist and an old timer, that I was, experiencing the release of the game back then. I was a young teenager and whatnot. I would like to see a remake. I think potentially there's a lot to mess up. But I think it'll be good if Nintendo finds a way to do a great job, which will be very hard, because there's a lot of I guess expectations to be met by original fans, if you will. I think it'll be a good thing to just keep the legacy moving on towards the future. Again, I think the 3DS version does a really good job of kind of bridging the gap between the very original game and kind of like modern games. But I feel like the more we move on to newer generations, it'd be interesting to see some sort of remake in the future to extend the legacy of this game, because in my opinion it's one of the best well put games of all time. When you consider the dungeon design, the puzzles in the dungeon, some of the bosses, Phantom Ganon is one of my all-time favorite bosses out of any game. The fighting mechanics, the soundtrack, the graphics. When you put everything together, that's why Ocarina of Time is it's a timeless, in my opinion, a timeless masterpiece. Because I will always cherish my time with this game. I will always have fond memories, and even though you can argue modern Zelda games obviously have better graphics, they may have better progression in terms of the game, better dungeon design, more creative ways to play the games. In my opinion, first impressions really matter and really count. And when I go back to when I first played this game for the first time, I was blown away like no other game managed to do for me personally, and hence why Ocarina of Time is my favorite game of all time, and one of the reasons why I'm excited to do this impressions video with you guys, and hopefully you guys had a good time just listening to me kind of like rambling about my experience with this fantastic game. So that's it for now. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching, and I will see you all later.